It's really fun to be here. I appreciate Amy and the Cal organization for the invite. I agreed to come and said yes because when I was in your shoes and I was a student at BYU, these were by far my favorite things to do, just my favorite classroom experience. We all know that some of, especially the entry-level classes before you get to your major, can get very boring. But I always found that when I would come to these and I would just hear stories, particularly of successful entrepreneurs and people that were going out and doing things that I was interested in, it just kind of pumped me up and got me motivated, and I loved it. As a matter of fact, I took this entrepreneurship lecture series my first year at BYU, and then I thought you could just keep taking it over and over and get credit, and then I learned, oh, you can't just keep taking the same class to get credit. So I just audited it like another 4 or 5 times, and I just kept going to it, and then finally they were just like, yeah, you can't keep coming to this class anymore. And then there was one specifically for female entrepreneurs, and they did a lecture series, and so I started signing up for that one and just kind of snuck in. And so by the time I was done with my undergrad, I did 6 or 7 of these and just loved them. I would always run up and talk to the speaker and some of the guys and gals, as a matter of fact. One of the female lecturers became one of my advisors, and she's on our board because she had built a similar business, and so I made a lot of fun connections through it and just loved it. So when Amy reached out, I was just happy to come and hopefully share a little bit of my experience and journey, and maybe it will do a little bit of the same for you that it did for me, and maybe get you a little bit excited and just get the wheels turning a tad. And what I wanted to focus on, as the title says, was passion, grit, and then if we have time, I'll talk about entrepreneurship, because I know generally speaking, this is about leadership, and a lot of you probably don't have entrepreneurship on your radar, and so if we can get to it, we'll get to it. But I really felt, as I just thought about lessons that I'd learned and what I believe in and just what I've observed, that underlying a lot of very successful leaders and entrepreneurs are traits of passion and grit. And I tended to see those over and over and over again, and it started to make me feel that maybe these are 2 of the most important attributes that can predict success, and maybe they're essential for success. I don't know for sure. But those were the things that I want to talk about today. I'm going to share some of my journey, and we'll talk about some of the examples and how I learned them through my experiences, and then I'm going to give you a chance to think a little bit about your life and your past, and I'll even invite you to pull out your phone and you can jot that down, and if you need to answer a text when you do that, then I won't be offended. But that's kind of where we'll take it. So a little bit of my background, and thanks for the kind introduction, Taylor. So I said hello to the world back in 1984. I was born in Houston, Texas, and my family moved to Salt Lake when I was 8. And just grew up, had a pretty normal upbringing, served a mission in Canada. 2005, I was 21. Got home, did my associate's degree at Salt Lake Community College, and then transferred to BYU and studied business over there. While I was at BYU, I had started a lot of businesses. None of them were particularly successful, but I started 4 or 5 companies, and the last time I was on this campus, I was trying to get people to sign up for this app that we were building, and I was just harassing students in the cafeteria. And since I'd been here, I was wandering around before the presentation. I don't know if you guys and gals realize how much this place has grown and advanced, at least from a facility standpoint, since I was here last 7, 8 years ago. This is really nice. The buildings that you have and the growth that's happened, I don't think BYU's keeping up, and I don't even know, is there a rivalry? Is that a thing, or that's not really a kinda? Okay. Yeah. You're doing your own thing. Yeah. Well, no offense, because I think that you're well on your way if you haven't already passed them in a lot of regards. It's looking good. This is a good school. These were nicer facilities than I remember having, and these were nicer facilities than UCLA. So this is pretty awesome what you have. But at any rate, that's what I did there. And then I took a year off again. I started a couple businesses that weren't particularly successful, but I was making another crack at it. And then I went to law school at UCLA, and then pretty shortly after being in law school, came to the conclusion it wasn't really for me. I finished it out and got my degree, but I started Slingshot while I was at UCLA. And I've been doing that ever since. We officially launched in 2014, so it's been close to 4.5 years. So that's just a little bit of the timeline. So what is passion? Couple definitions: an intense desire or enthusiasm for something, something you have boundless energy for. I kind of like this: a willingness to suffer for what you love. That's a pretty good benchmark for passion. So that's passion. Another way to think about it is, what are your dreams? What are your hopes and desires? What are the things that you just really care a lot about? Do you think maybe you've figured out what your life's work going to be? Do you feel like you have a purpose? What is that purpose? That's some ways to think about passion. And passion really, really matters for entrepreneurship. It matters for leadership, and it really matters for success. And there's 6 reasons why, at least I've observed, that it matters. And one of them is, I know YOLO is not really a thing anymore, but that used to be a term that we used back when I was your age. There was a gal that wrote, she wrote an article. She did end-of-life care for people that were at the end of their life. So 80, 90 years old, they don't have much time left, and she would talk to them and care for them. And she wrote a very popular article that came out 2-3 years ago about what these folks were saying at the end of their life, and particularly what their major regrets were. And she said that she heard these 5 regrets over and over and over. They were just very common. And one of them was, people really regretted that they didn't follow their passion. They'd get to their end of their life and just be like, man, I didn't really do what I wanted to do. I picked a career based on I just had an income need, or a spouse kind of pressured me into it, or my parents wanted me to do it, or it just seemed like a good idea and I got stuck in it. And they really regretted that when they got to the end of their life. And we only live once. You get one crack at this thing, and so just at a simple level, we may as well try and not have regrets and just do with our life what we want to do. So that's, I think, the most basic reason. Another reason is that usually things that you're passionate about, you're uniquely good at, or you've got some talent for. Sometimes that's why you're passionate about it. Other times they're just kind of weirdly going hand in hand. It was the case that I really did like video games when I was a kid, and I played them a lot, and turned out I was pretty good at it. And that was also a lesson that I kind of learned that I'll hit on in a minute here. So usually identifying your passion also is identifying something that you're good at. And it's good to do things that you're good at, because usually if you're good at something, you have a better chance of being successful, and you have a better chance of people paying you a decent amount of money, so you can make a living doing what you want to do. Another reason is grit, which we'll talk about as its own subject in a little bit. But, life gets tough. Every path that we go down gets hard, and it is absolutely the case that if you start to work and pursue things that you're passionate about, you're going to have a better chance of sticking with it. And just getting through those tough moments that are definitely going to happen. You're going to be tempted to quit. It's going to not make sense. And again, we'll get into all this, but it becomes really hard when you work on stuff for significant periods of time that are hard, that you're not that passionate about. It really makes it tough to get out of bed in the morning. On this point, I remember it was back in, I believe, 2010, Mark Zuckerberg came and spoke at BYU. Did any of you remember that? Or were you here for that when that got announced? It was kind of random. I'm not entirely sure why he was coming, but he came and spoke to us, and he is basically my age. I'm 34, so it was pretty incredible to see what he had accomplished. And despite some of Facebook's problems, they have been one of the most successful businesses in the history of the world, and connecting 2 billion people and everything they've done. So listening to his experience was really fun. And I remember one of the things that he said was that it was really important to do things you're passionate about, because usually there's a certain point during that journey that it will be rational to quit. It will actually make sense to quit, because the odds of success will be really low. The pain and the turmoil and the risk will be really high. Someone who's a third party, mentor, advisor, parent, friend, significant other will kind of look at it objectively and say, maybe you should take a different approach or do something else, and it will be rational to quit. And the only way you'll keep going is if you've got an emotional attachment to it, and that's probably only going to come if you're passionate. And he was really passionate about building a social network. As a matter of fact, when you hear him talk about that experience, at one point very early on, Yahoo offered him $1 billion. And he was a college kid like you, and he was 23 years old, and it might be kind of nice to have $1 billion. I mean, you could just kind of go do whatever you wanted to do. And he was talking to his board, and they were like, okay, well, yeah, we should probably sell this thing. You can be fabulously wealthy, do whatever you want. And Mark was like, well, I think if I sold this, I would just start another social networking company because that's what I want to do. And I already have one that's successful, so why would I sell it when I'm doing what I want to do? And it was a very strong indication that he was doing something that he was passionate about. And that transcends money, and it transcends a lot of things. But again, it ties into grit. And so it's just another reason why I think it's really important. I think a lot of people that are successful, they're doing something that they really, really care about. And that's why they got through all the hardship. Couple other reasons. Interestingly enough, and maybe some of you have noticed this, when you do something that you're passionate about and you start to follow a dream, people kind of just start helping out. And you know, if you're starting a company, I noticed early on, people just started purchasing our services and buying our product, and I didn't really even know why, because we had nothing. And we had no customers, and it was super risky and made no sense. But later on, they were, you know, oftentimes they would tell me, you were just really into it and excited, and I kind of wanted to support you. A lot of our early employees said the same thing. We had this dingy little office that was 500 square feet and a couch and these old computers. There was 4 of us in there, and like talented people were joining the company. And later on, I was like, why did you join us when you had all these other better companies, Vivint, and all these places you could have gone? And a lot of them were just like, you were just so excited about what you were doing. It just seemed like it might be fun, and I believed you that it was going to work. And I think that they were just responding to my passion, and that's just kind of a thing. People reach out and they want to help you with your dreams, and I don't entirely know why, but that's something that I've observed and I've experienced. Another reason is a little bit similar to taking action grit, but you'll be more likely to just start doing stuff and facing your fears and talking to people and working on the project if you're passionate about it. That's a very important thing to do. I have noticed that successful people tend to have a default attribute of taking action. They tend to not kind of have an idea and sit back and say, okay, well, I should probably plan this out and think about it a lot and read about it and talk to people, and then they're planning for weeks and months and years and sometimes decades. If you've ever met these people, they've been planning their passion for decades. And obviously that's not the best approach. A lot of the people that have been successful, I've noticed, they just get out there and get after it. They have an idea, and 3 days later, they're just going for it. And they're writing it down, or they're starting a business, or if they want to do a nonprofit, they figure out how to get that thing organized, start telling friends, set up a little Facebook page. And yeah, it's an incomplete idea, and it's a little embarrassing sometimes to get it out there, but that's a super important thing to do. And when you're passionate, it's a little bit easier to just get going. A little bit more excited when you wake up and there's something a little bit scary that you have to face that day, you'll be more likely to do it. So it's really important for that reason. And then lastly, this goes a little bit in line with the first one and not having regrets, but I really feel like people that are doing things that they're passionate about and care about are happier. I really feel that way. That's been my experience. I think it's the case because, you know, particularly if your passion becomes your job, you spend so much time there. I mean, you're at office at least 8 to 5. It's 40 hours a week. It is the bulk of your adult life and the bulk of your life in general. If it becomes your job, it's nice to work on something that you care about instead of going to work and going through the monotony and the chores and the tasks that you're just not that into. It just becomes a drudge. And so I think that's why people that are following their passion are happier. They're probably more likely to see success. They're probably making more money. They're probably having a lot of things that are contributing to that. But I think they're happier. And we only live one life. You may as well be happy. It's also the case that It turns out a lot of research being done, within the last 5 years has been on emotional intelligence, and portraying and exuding positivity. That's a lot more important than we formerly realized. I just read this Harvard Business Review book about the most important attributes of a CEO and leader, and they made the case that it was actually just coming in and being happy. Because like osmosis, it just drips on everyone that's around you. And if the leader and CEO is happy and positive, then it gives everyone else permission to do it. If the leader or CEO comes in as negative, then everyone kind of shirks and they're not really sure what's going on and they feel kind of weird. Maybe they don't want to speak up. I read an article recently that had made a similar suggestion for the primary parent of the home. Whoever it is that the kids are around the most, which is usually the mother, that one of the most important things for a child's development and happy was that the mother was happy and that she was exuding positivity inside the home, and they were correlating that to a lot of things with kids and being successful and healthy on their own, and it kind of makes sense. So I think that's a thing. So those are 6 of the reasons why I think finding and then pursuing your passion is really important. Going back to some of my experiences and how I found mine. So when I was a kid, kind of in that early range, early on, has anyone ever heard of Perry Mason or Matlock? They're older. They were old when I was a kid. They're old like Law and Order shows, just about cold cases and attorneys and lawyers. And Perry Mason was funny too because it was the dumbest show. He was an attorney, and then he was always pursuing a murder case, and they couldn't figure out the evidence. And then every episode at the end, he would get the key witness on the stand to crack and admit they were the killer. And it was like everyone ended that way. But I was a 10-year-old, and I was just kind of lit me up, and I thought it was really neat, and I decided that I wanted to be an attorney. And so from that age on, I had always determined in my head, I'm going to be a lawyer. So I had planned out my life and took steps to do it that way. On my mission, I talked about being a lawyer. I got home, and I took this aptitude and skill test when I was at the community college, and I tested really high on business and entrepreneurship and then just mediocre on lawyer skills. But I was just like, that doesn't matter. I want to be a lawyer. So I just ignored it. I talked to my counselor, and I was like, well, what's a good undergraduate degree to go to law school? And they said, well, the skills that make the most sense are learned in philosophy and English, and that's usually what we see. And I was just like, well, man, I really like business. Can I just take a business degree and then go to law school? And they were like, well, yeah, that's unusual, but you can do whatever you want. So I took a business degree for my undergrad and spent a lot of time figuring out how to get into a good law school and studying and taking the LSAT, and then finally went and got into UCLA Law. About a year in, I realized that I didn't want to do it. And it, in fact, was not what I was passionate about. And I just had to figure that out the hard way by actually practicing legal skills and looking over contracts, and I just didn't like it. And I was sitting back one day after my first year of law school and just thinking like, man, this is not good. I just spent a lot of time and effort getting to this point, and I had invested some money, and I was on somewhat of a scholarship, but still was paying half tuition for law school, which was a lot. And so I had this debt, and then it was 2 years left, and I didn't really know what to do. And I was just sitting back. I was 29 at the time, and I started thinking back through my life, and I started thinking that maybe I should actually be an entrepreneur. And some of the things that I thought about was, when I was a kid, I was always starting businesses. I was always starting lemonade stands, and I used to shovel the walk when it snowed for neighbors. And I learned that if I knocked on the door and asked for, $2 to $5, a lot of them would say no. So then I started asking for 25 cents, and it was like so cheap they just let me do it. And then when I would go to pick up the money, they felt bad, and they would give me $2 to $5 anyways. So I was doing that, and we moved into this new neighborhood. My brother and I set up this really complicated box fort in our backyard, this tunnel with all our moving boxes, and we invited all the kids over, but we charged them to go through it. And then I made these hemp necklaces that I would sell to my classmates in junior high. And I was like, wow, I was always doing stuff, always doing entrepreneurial stuff when I was a kid. And then I was flipping through this journal, And my 5th grade teacher made us write in a journal every day after recess. So I have an entry for every day of 5th grade when I was 10 or 11 years old, which was super cool to look back and just kind of peek into my mind. And probably a third of the journal was about different ideas I had to make money and businesses I was working on. And it was a constant theme in between, you know, random fights at recess or sports or whatever, and then back to the business and the money, and then blah, blah, blah. And so I was seeing this interest at that age. Even in my mission journal, when I read through that, I talked a lot about business ideas that I had. Right when I got off my mission, I started thinking of businesses that I could start with friends, and in fact started 5 as an undergrad. As I told you before, always going to the entrepreneurship lecture series. I was always meeting with CEOs and asking them out to lunch, and I was just always doing it. When I would get home from class, I would read about it in books. I would, follow certain blogs. It was just such a big part of my life. And then, sitting back and going through the law journey, it was just kind of like, well, duh, that's what I'm supposed to do. That's clearly what I'm interested in, because looking back at law, I didn't do that for law at all. I just got it in my head that I want to be a lawyer. I never went home and read a book on law. I never followed blogs or read about Supreme Court cases or anything that you would probably do if you were interested in it. So I finally just accepted the fact that, I should be in entrepreneurship. But I didn't want to quit, so I was just like, well, I'll finish law school, start the business during law school. Hopefully it works out. Lo and behold, it worked out, And a lot of the things that I was talking to you about the reasons why passion matters, I experienced those. I was happier. I was genuinely happier starting Slingshot. It was twice as much work. It was way more stress than school and other things. It was way harder, but I was happier doing it. And I was just feeling that feeling of not having regret, like I was on the right path. It was just such a win. So that was kind of my experience of going through this process of discovering what I was passionate about. And I wanted to invite you guys to do a little bit of the same thing. Maybe and this can help you reaffirm it, or maybe I can help you avoid going to law school and incurring that debt and figure it out before you go. So I'll invite you to pull out your phones, or if you have a piece of paper, I want to take you through this exercise. So think about, as I did, what were you interested in as a kid? And I think especially around the ages of 8 to 12, there's some thought around this idea that's when personality really starts to form and manifest. And there's a concept that it might be at its purest, because it's kind of before you get into junior high and high school and you start realizing social standing and how you should act and behave, and you start getting these influences that can change you. It's something to think about. What were you into as a kid? What were your hobbies? As weird or as random as they were, was there something that was just really fun for you? And maybe and hopefully you still do it, but even if you didn't, think about that. Is there anything that you'd be willing to do for free? That you really like it that much, you'll do it for free? Because back to my experience, I was doing entrepreneurship for free for a long time. All through my undergraduate degree and the year after, I was never making money. I was always plowing it back into my startup ideas. Everything I read, all the classes, all of the stuff. In my head, I didn't even realize I was going to be an entrepreneur. It was just fun. It was like a hobby. It's like some people go and, I guess make stuff in their garage and have something that they're doing that's a hobby, like restoring cars. What is the thing that you do? What's kind of a default that you'll go and do for free? Is there something that you're naturally good at? Or a few things? What are some of those things that you just kind of pick up easy, or you're maybe a little bit better at them than some of your peers? Again, I had that experience, and I look back to that aptitude test or the skill test, and I was way up here on business management and entrepreneurship and kind of around here on law. Didn't realize at the time that maybe that was a sign. And when I took the LSAT for the first time, I did terrible on it. Maybe that was a sign. So what are you naturally good at? And then spare time. What do you do in your spare time? What are you going to do tonight when you go home? What have you been doing this week? What are some of the clubs that you sign up for? What are some of the hobbies and interests you have with your friends? What are some of the elective classes that you've found yourself really excited to take and that you've enjoyed? It can be helpful to think about what you're doing in your spare time. I'll move through this a little bit quick with the time we have left. So grit. This one isn't as fun to talk about because it's a lot of work and a lot of pain. Passion's kind of the fun part, and I do believe passion comes before grit because, as we discussed, you'd be more likely to not hang in there. A couple ways to think about it: courage and resolve, strength of character, a determination to keep going, especially when things get hard. Just sticking with it, and that, it turns out, is so important. Regardless of what you're going to do, whether it's anime or working in the medical field, whatever it is, you're going to have your work cut out for you. And so developing that as a characteristic is really important. 3 reasons why it matters. This is one where I have personally never met someone that I would consider very successful who has sustained success in whatever they do that does not have grit, that was not really hanging in there and fighting and working hard. And when you talk to them offline, they've got the war stories of the times that it made sense to quit or they wanted to quit and they didn't. It just seems that everyone has to develop this. And so I've observed that it's all around. I just think it's in the DNA of success. There's this phrase, if you ever take, do any of you have family in Northern California, take the I-80 West and you go out there? I do too, in Sacramento. There's a little center for kind of just history of the passage of the Oregon Trail, which goes through there, and I stopped in it last time I was out there about a year ago. Really interesting and heart-wrenching how difficult that journey was for so many people, and they have a saying, the folks that arrived in Oregon, and they said that that the cowards never started and the weak died along the way, and then there was us, the Oregonians. And they are right that it was hard. And there was lots of times they didn't have money or they got stranded in an area and it was really cold, and that was a rough go. And you had to have grit to make it through that journey. And it's also the case, as I said, that every journey is hard. I remember when I was kind of making the rounds when I was your age as an undergrad, and I was still exploring and talking to folks in other industries. I remember talking to a doctor. I remember talking to an investment banker, a lawyer, lots of entrepreneurs, some of my professors, and about what that track looked like because I was starting to like academia a lot as well. And I was asking them about their job. And when I talked to the doctor, he told me that, he's like, you know, it's really competitive. And boy, if I knew what I knew now, I'm not convinced I'd do it. It was really hard. The money's not quite as good as I thought, and I've got this debt. So I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. And then when I went to the banker, he was like, you know, it's really competitive. It's really hard. I'm not making quite as much as I thought, and it was just rough. You know, I'm not sure if I would do it over again, you know, maybe think about doing something else. And then I talked to a lawyer. He said the exact same thing. And I even talked to some professors that said that. And it just dawned on me that, okay, it must be the case that everything's just hard. Like every path you go down, especially some of the paths where there's a bigger income potential, it's just hard. I know that creatives, I bet if you went and talked to an actor or creative writer, they'd tell us the exact same thing, how hard it is, maybe think about something else. And so the point is everything is hard. And I think most things worth doing, and probably all the things that you explain, the ones that shared, and others that wrote it down and feel like you know what it is, it's going to be hard. And so having grit and getting through it is really important. And then the last one is, has anyone read that book by Malcolm Gladwell that talks about the 10,000 hours? And he's observing that, it looks like it's taking about 10,000 hours of deliberate practice and work until you're a master of your craft. And then you back into that number, and it turns out it's 2, 3, or I forget how many years it is. Maybe one of you remember, but it's several years of full-time work on just doing that thing. It can take a long time, and it's a lot of work. And he had case after case, and he even used the Beatles as an example. And they didn't just come out the gate being one of the greatest bands in the world. They came out the gate not being very good. And they were working at it, and they finally got there after their 10,000 hours. So it is the case that all of us are probably going to have to do that. Even if we're innately good at it, we're going to have to put in the time and the work. And so having the grit matters, because even if we're following your passion and you're good at it and you're happy and you're feeling super excited, it's still work. It's still going to be hard, and there's still going to be times you're tempted to quit. So you got to put the time in. So those are a lot of reasons why grit matters. A couple stories that I'll share with you, and then we'll wrap up. I was fortunate enough to learn at a very young age that you have to stick with things in order to get good at them and for it to work out, because my dad wouldn't let me quit. It was like his one rule is, if you sign up for something, you're seeing it through. And so if I'd sign up for karate and I was 10 and like a month into it, I'm like, oh, this is stupid. And he's like, well, you signed up, you're getting your black belt. So I had to do it for 3 years, and same with, I had a basketball team and they were terrible. And I figured that out, like on game 1, we lost by 30 points, and I was so embarrassed. I was like 11 years old, and he's like, no, you're seeing it through. And so I saw through that whole season, and we lost every game, but he wouldn't let me quit. And then I had this experience when I got into junior high. I tried out for the wrestling team, and I wasn't particularly good. And in fact, I was terrible. And I lost every single match that year. I was in 8th grade, and my dad wouldn't let me quit. And that's a tough sport. Is there any wrestlers in here, by the way? So you guys know, that is a tough sport. And so he wouldn't let me quit. I went through the whole season of those dirty mats and the smelly guys and just getting beat up, losing every single match. And then we moved to a new junior high, and we moved to Salt Lake, and I went to Churchill. And my dad was like, hey, you should try out for the wrestling team. It might be a good way to make friends. And I was like, oh, no, you tricked me into that last time, He's like, well, just come meet the coach. So I went and met the coach, and he was really nice. And he was like, okay, you can go to one practice, and if you don't like it, you can quit. So I went to one practice, and it was actually kind of fun, and I did pretty well. And so I was like, okay, I'll do it. And oddly enough, suddenly I just started figuring it out, and I won every match that year. And I ended up taking first place in the district, and our team took first. And it was such a fun experience as a kid. And it was the first time that I was like, oh, I can start at the spectrum of being absolutely terrible and miserable, and if I just keep hanging in there, I might be able to get good and have success. And it really stuck with me, and every single experience for the rest of my life, that basically happened. When I when I first began on my mission for the LDS Church, I was really bad. I was super shy in high school, just couldn't get my words out, and was always tripping over them, forgetting the lessons, and it just wasn't good. And I just keep hanging in there, and my 3rd day in the MTC, I was like, I've got to get out of here. And the only way I could think of to get out and keep my dignity was to break my arm or some other bone. And so I was like thinking if I could roll out of the top bunk, and then I was just like too much of a coward to do it. And I was like, I guess I'm in this thing. So I'm just figuring it out. And eventually I started to get good. And I started to figure it out, and I started to remember the lessons and teach well, and all the leadership opportunities that were available I had, and I just had a great experience, and objectively it was successful. And it was at the end-to-end spectrum again. And actually before that, I went and did a door-to-door sales job for 1 summer before the mission experience. First 3 weeks, 0 sales. Every day knocking on hundreds of doors, rejection. Finally got there. So it just played out. And then the last one I'll share was with the LSAT, as I was telling you. That was a sign that I was on the wrong track, but I got a 145 when I first took that test. Is anyone in here pre-law, by the way? No pre-law? Okay.
Tell us how bad that is.
It's bad, yeah. You can't get into law school with that score. It's, like the bottom 10th percentile. And I was like, whoa, I guess I'm going to have to work harder at this than I expected. And I studied for the LSAT for 2 years. And I took every practice test that's available. There's 50 of them, and that's a 4-hour exam. And so for every year, I booked my Saturday, and I went and took a proctored LSAT exam, and it was a 4 or 5 hour commitment every Saturday. And I'm just inching along, and finally, after 2 years, I was in the 95th, 96th percentile and could basically go to any school I wanted and got scholarships. And again, it was just an end-to-end and a long journey, and I just had to get gritty. And the same thing happened with Slingshot. We're out of time, so maybe I can share that experience some other time, but that was basically it. So maybe something to think about as you take off. Some things that you started bad at but got good. Stuff that didn't pay off till way down the line. And things that you stuck with when others quit. Might inspire you to get a little gritty and have passion. So, oh, sure. But thank you so much for inviting me to speak. It was fun to meet everyone, and I wish you guys the best. It's a fun time of your life. I hope you find it is what you're passionate about, and I hope you have the courage to follow your dreams and you hang in there when it gets tough.